And when you welcome everyone, do you think can you because I'll be switching different people from the cohort. Can you just tell a little bit about yourself and your startup? Is that fine?
Hot seat, are we live?
We're we're live now.
Hi, so I'm Vivian Richards, the founder of a young startup called Vitalverse, a combination of a hardware and software application and hardware prototype to bring vital signs measurement, tracking, and sharing to as many different households as we possibly can. I'm super excited to be part of the Fōkcus mentoring program. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Awesome. Thanks, Vivian. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in for another episode of Tech School. Thanks for everyone tuning in on YouTube and tuning in live here on Zoom. For those that are watching this either on YouTube or recorded, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Every interaction we get with videos like this helps push it out to more people. So you giving us a thumbs up or you sharing your comments or just asking a question in the comment section on YouTube pushes that video out and could help it reach an entrepreneur or startup who really needs to hear that message. But with that being said, I'll hand it over to Johanna.
Great. Give me a second to get my slide sharing up and running, and then we'll jump right in. So share, present view. Okay, so hopefully you see our focus slide. All good? Hi, and welcome. Thank you for making time for Tech School today.
Joanna, it's not up. See if you can actually share it again.
All right, let me try again. Share. Screen one, share. Now is it up?
Now it's up.
All right, now let's try that again. All right, so hi and welcome. Thank you for making time for Tech School today. We're really excited to reveal our new branding. I'm not sure if anyone's gotten to see it yet, as well as the launch of our new blog. The blog, thanks to Carling's very hard work and many late nights, is going to be searchable for articles and video content. And we hope it's a useful resource for you as you navigate your own startup. Just a few little details before we get started in the presentation. Please mute if you're not talking to minimize background noise for other people. If you have questions, please post them in the chat and save them for the end. Carling and Stephen will be monitoring the chat for me. I'm not that solid at navigating slides and chat at the same time. Some of our speakers are a little more advanced than me. And at various points, just a heads up, I'll be asking for your thoughts and input, so be prepared for that. Now, let me introduce myself and we'll get started. Okay. Yay, it's working. This is my first time presenting in Google Slides. We found that this is a really easy tool for collaboration, and I quite like it for presenting as well. So I'm Johanna. I'm one of the co-founders of Fōkcus. My role at Fōkcus is COO. It's great to see everybody again. I'm going to start with a story. When you all know that project management is near and dear to my heart. When I was a baby project manager, I worked at a company called Amlin, which was a really exciting startup to be part of because it went through hypergrowth. When I joined the company, there were about 300 people, and by the time I left, there were over 3,000. And in this startup, we were really lucky to have a legal department. Rather than just having to one-off track down a lawyer, we had over time, we built a whole internal staff of lawyers. And one of the aspects of my job was to manage contracts with our service providers. And we had a lot of them because we were growing very fast. And there was a particular person in the legal department named Maureen, who was a paralegal. And she became my favorite colleague. And she was so patient with me. I found that I really enjoyed contracts, strangely. And whenever we got one, she would let me redline it and review it and make all my comments. And then we'd meet together and she'd tell me what I got right and what I missed. And it was an amazing learning opportunity for me. So in this talk, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I learned from Maureen. Here's our roadmap for today. We're just going to touch very briefly on these basic legal concepts. We're going to cover contracts, confidentiality, consulting, and trademarks. Some of you may already be familiar with these concepts. This tech talk is geared more towards those that are just starting out. And what legal presentation would be complete without a disclaimer? I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. And I'll offer the same warning that Ito did in our last tech talk. I'm going to talk about legal concepts. This talk may cause drowsiness. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery during this presentation. Let's start with contracts. You will likely very early on encounter contracts in your business operations. You don't need to be able to write one from scratch, but you do need to be able to quickly scan through the document, filter out what's legalese and what's real content to find the key points buried within the contract. Now, before I continue, I know sometimes we have lawyers on the call. You just raise your hand if you are a lawyer. And also maybe raise your hand if you've recently taken a business. Don't you raise your hand. Curling, I see you. Or if you recently took a business law class. Shoo, we're unsupervised today. You know, if we had a lawyer on here, I was going to tell you those are the experts, ask them the questions. But since it's just us, we're going to have to muddle through on our own. So what's a contract? From a legal standpoint, a contract is a very specific thing. This is from Oxford English Dictionary. A contract is a written or spoken agreement, especially one concerning employment, sales, or tenancy that is intended to be enforceable by law. Definitions by themselves, not super helpful when you're facing the need for a contract, which is when, by the way. When have you all had to face contracts yet? I see Tripty and Vivian. You want to jump in? Have you had bumped into contracts yet? I hear crickets.
So more just formalizing like an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and then after last week's IP talk, or the week prior IP talk, really reviewing some of the terms and conditions on like the gig sites, like an Upwork and a Fiverr, just to know what my protections were left and right.
Great, thank you. And I have some thoughts on other times that you might bump into contracts that I'll share with you in a moment. So since definitions are not super helpful, let's talk about what might be helpful. These are the legal elements of a contract. To be legally enforceable, they have to have these 4 elements. Mutual assent has to be proven objectively, so it can't just be like, I said that they agreed. And it's usually established by showing an offer and acceptance, like I offered to do X in exchange for Y, and then it has to have an acceptance, like the parties hereby agree, blah, blah, blah. The next thing it needs is consideration, which we're going to talk about on the next slide in just a minute. Also needs capacity. Capacity rules also often require a person to have reached a minimum age, like maybe you have to be at least 18, and they have to have soundness of mind, which I know doesn't necessarily apply to everyone here, but we all do our best. And then it has to have legality or legal purpose. And that's the requirement that the object of or the reason for the contract has to be legal. Contracts for illegal stuff, not enforceable. So if somebody didn't execute a hit correctly, like the mafia can't sue for breach of contract. So now we'll talk about consideration as promised. I didn't don't know about you, but this was not intuitive to me. I had no idea that in order to have a contract that you have to have this thing called consideration, which is a thing of value. And it doesn't have to be necessarily money, but it has to be something like your time or money or an object. It has to be something that has value to the people that are party to the contract. And the example that came to mind for me was like when a parent transfers a car to a child and they say that the value of the transfer was $1. That dollar is really important in the transaction, because that's the thing that executes, it makes the transfer of the title valid, right? Even though the car might be worth way more than $1, you have to have this concept of consideration. Consideration can also be forbearance, which is like, I'll pay you not to do something, like I'll give you $1,000 if you don't build that road next to my fence. So we talked briefly with Vivian about contexts that she's encountered. You also encounter them for if you're making a product, you may be purchasing raw materials for your manufacturing. Those will be enforced by contracts. You may be providing goods or services to your customers. Those will be governed by contracts. You may have founder arrangements with your co-founders. You may be taking on investors. You may have interns. You may have leases. So all those things are contracts. So you're definitely going to bump into them in the course of your startup. Usually when we think about contracts, we think about written agreements, but actually oral agreements are enforceable as well. And I didn't know that there are actually there are statutes around oral contracts. They are not enforceable quite as long as written contracts, but they are enforceable if you can prove that they exist. And I wanted to, and so while I was thinking about this, I started thinking about like, what are some examples of oral contracts that I know about? And I remembered a class I got to take with curling at USC with Noam Wasserman, who's the author of Founder Dilemma. And he told a story about a company called Zipcar, which was a startup in like the 90s. It was two women who met like at kindergarten when their kids were there and became friends and had an idea to create a company called Zipcar, which was like a car sharing service, very, very early on, before the sharing economy was well established. And over coffee, they shook hands and said like, okay, we're going to do this 50-50. And then, sometime later, one of the founders said, this whole startup thing is not really for me. She had like another baby and she left the company. And but the legal agreement, the oral agreement that they had was that she owned the company 50-50, and there weren't any constraints around that ownership. And so the person who stayed, who really loved the company and wanted to stay in it and wanted it to grow, only owned half of the company. So that handshake agreement that they made had a huge impact on that one founder that stayed behind, who did 100% of the work, but only owned half of the company. So oral contracts are valid. They're legally binding as long as they're reasonable, equitable, conscionable, and made in good faith. Me personally, I prefer to write things down. So I want to, at the end of each section, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Fōkcus can help in slightly different ways. Sometimes it's with information, and sometimes it's with additional resources. So some law firms have groups that specialize in startups, and you'll see that they invest quite a bit in providing resources. Two of our favorites are Cooley's site, Cooley Go, and Goodwin Law's site, Founder Workbench. And I believe Founder Workbench is they have the same agreements that Y Combinator uses with their startups. Also, I wanted to mention, and I learned this from Curling, that a high-end lawyer, if your startup is quite successful, you'll find yourself quickly dealing with term sheets and founder agreements and investors and all sorts of legal stuff that you're really going to need some help navigating. And a lot of times, these higher, sort of premium tier law firms, I don't know, Carling, what's a good way to describe those law firms, but they have practices that are specific to startups, where they have people that have a lot of experience dealing with this very specialized area of law.
Just the top tier ones like Wilson Sonsini or something of that nature.
And here I think what's Rogers' law firm?
It's
there's the P.
You start with a P. Procopio.
Procopio, yeah. So so they have some attorneys and Roger who we've had at some of our events. In particular comes to mind. He has an office in the Bay Area and in San Diego. So anyway, so as you get to those stages, know that you can have a conversation with these lawyers, and they may not charge you anything, or they may defer your payment, or they may make some other kind of arrangement with you. So don't be afraid that having a really solid lawyer that might appear to be out of your range, don't be afraid of that. Definitely have the conversation with them. If your company is really that viable and that successful, they want your business, and they're going to be interested in establishing a long-term relationship with you, which might mean foregoing some fees early on in your relationship. So other way that we can help is watching future tech talks. I think we're going to do a segment on automation tools that can help you manage contracts. And I'm sure we'll have other lawyers on it in the future, and we can touch on contracts. Now let's talk specifically about a couple types of contracts. First, we're going to cover confidentiality, and then we'll cover consulting. A lot of questions we get are around confidentiality. And here's our take. The more people you talk to about your idea, the better. That's how you refine your idea, how you get people excited about it. 99.99999% of people are not going to drop what they're doing and steal your idea and try to build a company around it. But there are some cases where a confidentiality agreement is appropriate. So let's talk first about what, and then we'll talk about when. So a confidential disclosure agreement outlines information the parties wish to share with one another for certain evaluation purposes, but they want to restrict from wider use and dissemination. And the parties agree not to disclose the non-public information that's specifically covered in the agreement. So when is this important? Employees and interns, you don't want them to take your company with you when they leave. Partnerships, you may collaborate with another company where they get to see kind of under the hood the operations of your company and how you build your products and what all of your trade secrets are. So you want to make sure that when that partnership is over, that they can't use or disclose your proprietary processes and product know-how. And then services, like if you have a company building software for you, that should be confidential, and they shouldn't be able to share, your code content and your workflows and things, outside of the work that they're doing for you. Also, confidentiality is a good thing to build into your contracts. It doesn't always have to be a standalone document. Does anybody know how long a confidentiality agreement lasts? It's a trick question. You have to specify it in the agreement. Trade secrets are special. You'll want to make sure that those are perpetual, like forever. You wouldn't want like a confidentiality agreement that covers the Coke formula for like 1 year and then it gets published on the internet. That would be bad. So make sure if you're covering trade secrets, it's a perpetual clause. But otherwise, for just regular confidentiality agreements, I've typically seen 1 to 5 years, depending on what the relationship is, how long you expect it to be and what's being protected. If it's a thing that's going to, expire in 3 years or be replaced in 3 years, then you don't need a 5-year protection agreement. Okay, so confidentiality agreements and non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements, they're all the same thing. If you want to be really particular, some people differentiate NDAs for transactional matters like mergers and acquisitions, and then they use confidential disclosure agreements for transactional matters, for non-transactional matters, sorry, like performing services or consulting work. But I don't differentiate between these. I most often hear people say NDA versus CDA, but you can use both, or you can just use CA. It doesn't matter. And if you're talking to a lawyer, usually they'll be able to differentiate what all those things are and know what you're talking about. So how can Fōkcus help? Did you know that investors typically refuse to sign confidentiality agreements? Curling, you want to jump in and give some insight on sort of what the thinking behind that and why that is? Because I know that frustrates a lot of people.
Yeah, I know when we're talking about investors, one of the benefits of having investors is kind of green money, that they have this wide experience with different types of groups. They may work with an e-commerce or a fashion tech company, or maybe a wearable or health one, and then they can actually give you funding, but also this great knowledge that they have. And when I was a little curling, my legal experts, and even as an investor, really gave me a lot of knowledge. But for them to be able to do that is that when you sign an NDA, usually what happens is it kind of puts kind of limitations on who else they can help. So they never want to actually put this kind of limitation on a firm or agency or things of that nature. So that's why I learned when I was younger that, one, the benefits of having them there because they had this knowledge. But if I actually created this kind of limitation by having them have an NDA, then most of the time they weren't able to help me, right? And I really needed that help when I was younger, especially at an early stage. So that's one way of kind of thinking about why most of them refuse. It's just they want to have this kind of brighter, in some ways, a more bigger network to help you with. Hope that helps out, Johanna.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I know a lot of people get frustrated by that or puzzled by it, and not all the investors take the time to explain why they don't sign them. They just get irritated that you even ask them. So, but we try to work only with the nice ones that are patient with everybody. And I'm sure we'll have some of them on in future Tech Talks, and we can ask any specific questions that we have about those types of things and the thinking behind that when they're on. So let's talk a little bit more about one more type of contract, which is consulting. This is the last contract type that we'll cover today, and then we'll move on and we'll talk briefly about trademarks. Everybody still awake? Nobody driving or operating heavy machinery, I hope. So consulting, because navigating consulting can be tricky. Anybody have any thoughts about what can go wrong in a consulting arrangement? Or have stories of lessons learned? I'll give you a minute. All right, we got crickets again. So some of the things I've seen is incomplete deliverables, withholding of payment if not satisfied, or a customer receives the services but doesn't pay, or a service provider can't complete services because they don't have the skill or time or interest, especially if you're partnering with another startup. You know, early stage companies can be a little fragile, so there is more risk when you work with them, and you just should recognize that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't work with them. It just means you need to recognize and protect yourself against the additional risks. So this is when the consulting agreement can help you. And let me tell you a little bit more about what types of things you should have in your consulting agreement. So scope of work is really important to define the scope of work. And I'll just sort of explain in the context of a website, because that I think that's pretty accessible to most people. But if I say I hire Curling to build my website, Curling, will you build my website?
Yes.
I'll pay you too. Are you excited about that?
Yeah, that's great.
So do we need a contract?
I would like to have a contract, but I've done it without.
So there are a few points, you know, if that's as much as we talk about, there can be a lot of disconnects. Like, I really need the website done by this weekend because I have like a really important meeting on Monday. And if I don't tell him that, I'm going to be mad that I thought a website only takes a couple days and he thought he had like as much time as he needs in between all his other stuff because we didn't talk about it, right? Another thing that can happen is I'm thinking web application, but he's technical and I'm not. And he's thinking website. So I'm thinking like it's going to have a database and logins and custom graphics. And it's going to move all around. It's going to be cool. And he's thinking like it's going to be a brochure with 3 pages, right? And so if you don't talk about what the scope is, then you're really disconnected. Also, website for me might mean like all the stuff I ever think that I might want to put on my website perpetually. And for him, it might be, I'm going to build this and I'm going to give it to you, and then it's going to be yours. So you need to be thinking about like, once Curling thinks he's done with the work, like, where's the line? Also, Curling might need some things from me. He might need templates and he might need graphics and other stuff. And I might just think, I hired him to build the website. That's his problem, right? But Curling might be like, you know what? Like, she only hired me to build the website. She didn't hire me to build the graphics or pick the template or, provide the pictures or any of that stuff. And so like, I'm just going to wait till she gives it to me. So you can see there are all these points of derailment just on one thing on the scope of work. So you really need to take the time to think through, like, role play it in your head of like, how will this project work, and work with a vendor like Curling who will ask a lot of questions about like, who's going to do this and who's going to do this and who's going to do this, to make sure it's very, very clear. Okay, the next thing is business relationship. Now that sounds a little touchy-feely for contract territory, but what I mean is when I hired Curling to do my website, I might be thinking like, I just hired an employee and he's going to do whatever I want and he's going to work full time for me. But Curling might be a website consultant and he might be thinking I'm one client among 10 clients, and he's going to try to figure out how he can maximize like his productivity across the 10 projects that he's working on. And so we need to define our relationship. Does Curling work for me? Is Curling working for other people while he's working for me? Is he my employee? And also, Curling might get confused. He might think like, oh, you hired me to build your website. I'm your employee and I get some health insurance and some paid vacation, right? And so you want to make sure that you spell that out in the business relationship. Also, payment terms. Especially when you're an early stage startup and you might not have revenue, or you may have very limited revenue streams. So you want to make sure that the work that you're doing on behalf of someone else is not going to sink your company. You don't want to sign up to do some work that's going to cost you more than how much you can afford. And you need to work with customers that understand that and are okay with it. And you need to not be embarrassed about it, and just real talk with these customers, because these early customers are so important. They have to love you, right? And so they should be pretty invested in your startup. If not financially, they should be like, they should care, right? And so you want to think about, can they pay for some of the assets up front? Can they prepay you for some of the work? If you're doing some work for them, can some portion of it be a paid trial? I know sometimes we have to do the work for free, and sometimes we do have to, put things on our credit cards or borrow money from our parents or whatever, so that we can create a product and get people to use it so that they'll know that they love it. But really, if at all possible, you should try to get paid for it, and you should try to be really honest about, what your constraints are and what it's really going to cost you to do the project, and really sort of take the time to think through like how hungry you are for the work, and how important that client's going to be in terms of reference and marketing benefits and all of those things. All right, and the last thing is you want to protect your IP. So particularly if you're hiring a company to do software development for you or to build a product for you, you want to make it really clear who owns the intellectual property. You don't want to end up, paying someone to build something and then also allowing them to own the intellectual property, because then they can compete with you, or they can even sue you for infringing on their intellectual property. So you want to be really careful about those things, like who owns what when you do this work. And think about it not just in terms of software, but it's also work product, right? So if you build templates or other assets, business things, like figure out, like, do you share ownership of them? Who's allowed to use them when the project is over? Are they yours, or do they belong to the company that built them for you? Especially if the company has a lot of customers that are similar to you, they're going to want to leverage the work that they did for you to make their work for their other clients more efficient. And you need to have a real conversation with them and be candid. And if you can allow them to do that without hurting your business, great. But if it's going to hurt your business, you need to make sure that those things are protected. Okay, so be very cautious of consultants who offer services in exchange for equity. This is always a red flag, and we hear so many sad stories about people that have entered into these arrangements. I know it seems like a no-brainer, right? Like, I don't have any money and you have programming services. I'll give you equity in my company in exchange for you're going to build my product. The problem is, if that company or person is not invested in what your startup is, and they're just a software company, a dev shop, if something happens in the course of your relationship, they still own a portion of your company. So if their company fails, or if they are unable, or if the people that had the key know-how in your to build your product leave their company, like that, you find yourself in this really challenging situation. And I'll tell you a story, and I'll change some of the details, so we'll protect the identities of the folks I'm talking about. But we did work with a founder who met someone in school who said, oh, my family has a consulting firm overseas and they do software development, and for some equity in your company, we could partner up and I can have my company's software team do the development for you, and you'll have your product, and we'll be partners. But it turned out that and she said, also, I'll give you a discount. We are going to need you to pay something, so you give us part equity and part money. So she used all of her money and some of her equity to pay for this development for this project that she was so passionate about. And she was so excited that she found somebody who would, do this work reasonably. But it turns out that the family business overseas was like that person's little brother and not a real business. And they weren't a viable organization to even do the development work. It took a long time. They weren't able to finish it. And in the end, like, a portion of her equity had been sacrificed, and all of her funding had been sacrificed, and she didn't have a product. And it was really frustrating. And unfortunately, we hear quite a lot of stories along those lines. So just be very, very cautious in entering any kind of equity for services, especially if it's a project-based thing. You'd be much better off taking a little more time and working on finding someone that actually cares about what you're building and wants to be more like a co-founder. And then equity is totally appropriate. They're going to keep putting in over time rather than just taking out. Let's see.
And Johanna, we did get 2 questions from the group, but we can take those 2 questions afterwards too.
I'll let you decide based on what the questions are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you know what? One you might have covered it offhand. We'll just do one of them, and then maybe the second one from Vivian. Now we'll do after, because I have some feedback for that one. But sure. The one from Stephen was to say, do you know any other resources that someone can use to start mocking up contracts, like confidential agreements, consulting agreements? Is there a place you can go? Would you recommend that those ones you mentioned earlier?
So there's 2 sites that I mentioned earlier, Cooley Go and Founders Workbench. It's Goodwin Law's Founders Workbench. It's foundersworkbench.com, and I think it's CooleyGo.com, COOLEY. But we can post this links later. But they have free consulting agreements that you can use as a starting point and modify for what you need. And also there's sites like LegalZoom that kind of uses artificial intelligence and sort of standards. I think those cost something. I know the Cooley Go and the Goodwin Law templates are free to use, which is amazing. And we know that that they're designed for startups. Those 2 sites are actually geared specifically to startups. So so hopefully that's helpful. All right, you have another question, or you want to jump back?
Why don't you jump back in, and then the one for Vivian, I'm gonna have her do it afterwards, because there's some things you might cover on that too. So
all right. So I mentioned, I think, Noam Wasserman's book before, Founder's Dilemma, but that book is great because it has all these case studies for equity decisions. So I know we're on a little equity tangent, but that book's an amazing resource for helping you think through some of those things. And it will, I would highly suggest that you read it before you make any decisions about allocating equity for people that you don't know very well, or for people that are going to provide services. Also, there's tons of other ways to go. There's resources like the Tech Hire program through San Diego Workforce Partnership. I know we've talked about that a few times, but and then also the local code schools often have a free to you intern that where they have people that are just graduating from their code school and they need some experience on their resume, and so they do a little internship at the end of their program. It's actually part of their program. So I know at least there are at least 2 local code schools that we have a relationship with that have programs like that. So let's move on to our last legal topic. It's not a contract type, but it is something you'll encounter early on. It's trademarks. I'm going to touch really briefly. I'm not going to address copyright, but I will point you to some additional resources on trademarks that at the end that also touch on copyright. So Fōkcus used to host a program called City Highlights, which is pretty similar to Tech School. The pre-session that we do with the startups right before Tech School. So we spend like a half an hour, and Carling and Steven and some other mentors like Sam sometimes come on. And we talk to the startups about what's going on with them. But in this program, we actually did it in the Apple stores, and we would focus on one founder at a time, and we'd have like 6 to 8 mentors, and you'd pitch right in the Apple store. Your stuff would be up on like a screen on one of the tables there. And the founder would introduce themselves, go through their pitch deck, and then we would provide some feedback framed around the pitch deck. We always spent the most amount of time on what Carling calls the billboard slide. Like it's your introduction slide that has your company name and your logo on it, and maybe a little tagline about what you do. And we think about it like if you're driving on the 405 freeway, or if you're driving on the, what's our local, on the I-15 or the I-5, and you see a billboard, like you only have a few seconds to sort of to grasp, what's being communicated on the slide, and you want to make sure your billboard slide sort of serves the same purpose. So we talked about things like your company name, your logo, your branding, and websites. This is all trademark territory. Here's what the Oxford English Dictionary says about trademarks. It's a symbol, word, or words legally registered or established by use as representing a company or a product. I thought this was kind of a fun thing. This is Bass Brewery's, one of their early logos, but they were the first image to be registered as a trademark in the UK in 1876. And there's a little controversy if you want to nerd out and look on Wikipedia under trademarks. There's like 5 different companies that claim that they were the very first registered trademark. And Australia and the US and the UK kind of have this like little controversy about like who gets to claim having the world's first trademark. And it's a sort of a fun little story to read. It's just like one little paragraph. So anyway, but this sort of seems to be the one that most people say is the oldest. It's registered as trademark number 1. And then just an aside, this logo is trademarked, but the copyrights of this version of the logo are expired. And the trademark doesn't identify the author, but because of the age of the logo, you can kind of assume that the person died more than 70 years ago, because it was trademarked in 1876. So it's a little trivia for you. So on the left is the symbol for a registered trademark, and on the right is the symbol for trademark. There's a slight but significant difference in that the registered trademark offers some additional protections. 2 of the key ones that I know of is that the registered trademark, if someone challenges it, that the burden of proof is with the challenger versus the person who owns the trademark. And if you're not registered, then the burden of proof is with you. The other difference is that with the registered trademark, I think it offers countrywide protection versus the need to prove in each region if it's unregistered. So, so those are the two main differences. And I wanted to give you this slide with some examples about what types of things can you protect. In the very early stages of your company, do take time to make sure that you're not infringing on other people, but don't spend too much time trying to get it perfect. I started a company a number of years ago, and I called it, it was by accident, right? So I had a product, I was about to sell it, and the person I was selling it to said, like, what name do you want me to put on the invoice? And I said, just Johanna, which I meant like just only use my name, Johanna, but she put just Johanna on there. And that became the name of my company by accident, because that's how they invoiced me. And I was like, oh, well, that's as good as any other name. And I registered my Just Johanna domain name shortly after that. And that was my company name for a couple of years until my products kind of outgrew that name. And I had other people, contributing significantly. And I thought, well, it's a little annoying to be called Just Johanna when it isn't Just Johanna. So I changed the name of my company to Oddbird Planet. It was like about 2 years in. It's totally fine to do that. Another path that you can go is you can brand your products rather than the name of your company. Think about like Kleenex brand. I'm not sure I even know. If I think hard, maybe I know, but I don't know who makes Kleenex. But that brand it's very clearly defined to me. Like, absolutely, I know what Kleenex is and I know what that brand is. So, and what the name of the company is that makes it is not actually super relevant. Let's see what else. Sites like Open Corporates can help you quickly determine whether your company name idea is already being used. There's a site called Looka, LOOKA.com, that has a logo maker tool that combines artificial intelligence with your design preferences. The site used to be called logojoy.com, but now it's called Looka. And there's another site called nounproject.com that has free graphics that you can use. So there are some tools that'll let you sort of check if it's already taken and let you come up with a design that you can establish your company name and web presence pretty quickly. Having a website established helps demonstrate use in commerce for your federal trademark application. So if you are going to apply for a registered trademark, that's an important thing. If you want more information, you can check out Ito's talk, which was 2 weeks ago, I think. It was just the week before Thanksgiving. It's a great tutorial, super easy to understand explanation of marks and how you should make your decisions about your company name and what you trademark and what the different types of marking options are. So I really enjoyed his talk. Domain registries like Google, Bluehost, and GoDaddy offer domain availability searches. Fōkcus can help with AWS credits, which cover hosting fees. You can reach out to Curling if you want more information and haven't taken advantage of that already. And I've been after Curling to do a talk on how to set up a custom website with all the things he's been learning lately. So maybe you can watch for that in the near future. In the meantime, you can check out Ito's talk on our YouTube channel. And that is sort of the tail end. We covered contract basics, and we touched on 2 specific types of agreements, confidentiality and consulting. We briefly covered trademarks. If you're looking for even more information, check out Tech School episode 18 with IP attorney Larry Maxim, who covers who's using your IP. I hope some of what we've shared today has equipped you to navigate some of the legal stuff that you'll encounter very early in your startup journey. And with that, I'll hand it back to Stephen.
Awesome, thank you. Curling, I know we had a few questions. Did you want to cover those?
Yeah, I was going to have Vivian. Did you want to just unmute yourself and answer this question? I have some ideas on this question, but we could pose it to Johanna first.
For sure. So most directly related to the consulting portion. And so I guess the question is, how do you know what's a good fair market price, like for the actual scope of work that you want? Like, is it better just to reach out within your internal network and kind of bounce ideas off of? I think the example that I used was like a UI designer where, I would want an honest broker that's like, okay, well, if you want these polka dots over here, that's going to be like $10,000. Like, how badly do you want these polka dots, right? And but I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate to have that conversation with the person you're also hiring, or is that part of the dynamic you look for when you're choosing a consulting company, right? Like that they'll kind of meet you where you're at.
Yeah. So, I mean, for sure, you're going to want to ask upfront, later when I have maintenance, what are those costs going to look like? Because you don't want to, they might artificially make the maintenance costs really high because they don't want to do maintenance, right? But there are some ways that you can get the information without having to sort of gauge like truthfulness and authenticity in the interaction. One way is to get quotes from multiple service providers, right? Curling always says like 3 is a good guideline, and then we recently learned a secret that I didn't know, which is universities like Cal State San Marcos are required to share what they pay for things. So if you can find a university that has paid for some similar service, you can contact their Office of Budget and ask them, and it might take them a little while to get back to you, but they'll disclose to you what they've paid for, like, what did it cost to have your website built? What does it cost for your annual website maintenance? And so you can find out some information from organizations like Cal State San Marcos just by calling their budget department, and that seems like an amazing free resource.
Thank you.
Of course.
The only thing I was going to add, Vivian, there's groups like Upwork, Upwork.com. You can actually go check them out, see what the hourly rate for average of it. They even have some breakdowns on certain projects in Upwork. When I was at Startup Month, there's all these groups that got designers and stuff like that from Upwork, and they were able to, get at least 3 quotes from them, understand, and they learned so much from those interviews that when they got their own UI person, they were able to at least talk to them, have a safe one. So I would say it's kind of customer discovery, right? But a couple groups have used Upwork just to learn more. So that might be a good way to think about it. That's the only thing I was going to add.
Glassdoor also often posts salary information. Is a little tricky to get it, but usually if you go to it from a Google search, you can get it. Like, what's a normal hourly rate for such and such role? And if you're confident on the job title, like user interface designer, then you should be able to zero in on that information just from a Google search as well.
That's great. Stephen, any more? That was the last one from the cohort.
Yeah, I got a few questions for Johanna. So one that's, I guess, come up before from a few startups in our ecosystem, and it may be something that could have come up in Larry or Ito's talk, but I wanted to hear your take on it. So as a startup or entrepreneur, where do you draw the line between doing things yourself and needing to get a professional involved, right? Like a lawyer or somebody who's, a law expert, right? And I know that it's probably a gray area depending on who you are and what you're doing. But do you have any tips on that?
I do. That's a great question. So I maybe for us, for Fōkcus, because I had that special training with, my buddy Maureen for like 6 years, like I feel really comfortable with certain types of contracts. Not employment contracts, but with service contracts, I'm super comfortable. So for me, like the line, like on a service contract, I usually just write it ourselves. But and lawyers will tell you, every lawyer will tell you, don't do that. But with stuff that I'm not comfortable in, like definitely I err on like I'm scouring the internet for like reputable examples of things, and then I'm usually taking like here's my draft of something, and I'm going to the lawyer saying, I wrote this, can you read it and make sure it's okay? So rather than paying the full service fee for them to create it for me, I'm actually taking a stab at it and hopefully shaving off some of the hours. So they're just reviewing and editing what I hope is a pretty solid draft rather than creating something. And sometimes they'll tell me like, you know what, I have a standard agreement and I'll just give it to you and it's $50. And in that case, just take theirs and don't pay them by the hour to review. But if it's something really specialized, you can totally take a stab at it and give them a partially completed work product.
Awesome. Those are some great tips.
You know what I just saw is that India is on our call. Did you know that? Hi, India.
Hello, India. And we have Andre too. Andre's on from cohort 2.
Oh, that's so fun. I haven't seen you in so long. You're like right in the middle of my screen. That's so cool. That's fun. We talk about your project all the time.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And hi, Andre. It's great to see you too. Sorry, a little diversion from the questions, but it's so fun to see some of these folks sometimes.
Good to see you guys too.
That's great.
We tell stories about your project too, Andre. You know, your team like really delivered such an amazing project for you at Cal State San Marcos. It was such a cool thing to watch.
They did.
Yeah. All right. We got more questions?
I think Stephen has one more, and then we're going to try to go into the wrap up and then speed networking.
Okay.
Yeah, I got one more. So Johanna, we know that you have this experience as a startup founder. You've been part of, startups in the past. And I know that you've gained a lot of knowledge in legal space from all that. And then of course, the talks we listened to with Larry and Ito and the other events that you've been able to be a part of. Given all that knowledge that you have, is there one or two kind of general tips you might want to give kind of a startup or founder? So this could be general advice that you've seen that be super helpful for the startups that you've met, or it could be advice just to, look at it as maybe to your younger self, right? Before you knew what you knew now.
Yeah. So I do. And what I'm really thinking about is when I was, when you're younger, and even now sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I often have found myself in this situation where if I need something that I don't know anything at all about, I'm really intimidated by people that are experts in that thing. And so if I was talking to my younger self, I would say just be humble and honest about it and show up and say you know what, I just don't know about this. And so I'm a little bit at your mercy and could you please educate me? And can you help me understand like Maureen did for me? That was amazing. I had 6 years of one-on-one, paralegal training. It was great. Just because I was humble and I said, you know what, I don't know anything about contracts, but I know you have a big backlog and I always have to wait. Could I learn some stuff from you so that I can make this process more efficient? And that's kind of how we started down the path, where she was really mentoring me for all those years on how to read contracts. But I would say, try to set aside any intimidation or anxiety that you have about interacting with, a lawyer that charges $1,500 an hour, or a finance, a CFO with 30 years of experience, and recognize that they are regular people too. And if they're talking to you, they probably want to help you, and try to find your way through that, rather than avoiding it and not getting the benefit of their amazing experience.
Awesome. Those are some great tips. Thanks, Johanna.
I had a question. This is Andre.
Sure.
Hey, Andre.
Can I ask it or do I need to share it in the chat?
No, that's fine, Andre.
Okay. All right. So you guys know I'm on this venture of prototyping a watch, and me and my partner I use me and my partner loosely, we're at the stages of kind of rationalizing the design to make sure that it's constructible. And we've actually become members of this makerspace, and we've been prototyping with their equipment. But I guess I'm running into some problems with my partner, and that she's really not putting in any of the work. I'm doing 95% of the work, and she works full time, and she has very little time to work. And at the same time, I understand that, but it's she came here to start a business. She moved here, and I'm kind of like, I feel like she's leaving me high and dry. I don't want to like say it's like, well, we should like go our separate ways, because I feel like in some ways it'll affect our friendship. And I know that you guys aren't like therapists or psychiatrists, and you can't sort out my personal stuff. But can you give some advice on how to kind of like approach her and, you know, get her on board? And you talked about like Zipcar, and how like, you know, they had this kind of agreement at first, this written agreement. But how do you light a fire under somebody who's not working? And when do you know that it's time to kind of like, you know, part ways?
So one of the things that I learned actually from curling is to reframe my thinking around that, because I had that question a lot sometimes too. You know, we've had a lot of different people come and go through Fōkcus over the last few years, and you know, I really was coming at it from a corporate perspective, like this person is not doing their job and I need to talk to HR about this problem. But that's not really how startups work. You know, people contribute what they're willing to contribute, and sometimes there are external circumstances that prevent them from contributing, even if they want to. We still have to pay our bills. We still have to eat. We still have to raise our children. We still get sick. You know, things happen to our immediate family that requires our attention, and you really have to have this mindset of grace around that, which can be very frustrating. But just know that if this person doesn't do what you expected of them, there may be another person waiting in the wings who can step up and help. And one of the things we learned again from Noam Wasserman is this idea, as well as from Roger from Procopio, of dynamic equity shares, where, you know, it shifts up and down depending on how much someone is contributing. So you can have an agreement, and it doesn't have to be written down initially, where you just say, like, you know, your portion of equity is going to be impacted by how much money and time you contribute and how much work product and work idea you contribute. So you don't want to have a 50-50 split where one person says like, okay, I'll do 2 hours a week and I'll do your social media posts, and the other person, you know, makes the prototypes and spends all the money, and that's not fair. And so you need to come up with a, you know, something that works for you. I think there's another book called Slicing Pie. Is that what it's called, Curling?
Yes.
That can also help you think through some of those things. So I'd recommend that, you know, for sure read those things, but also just, you know, Noam also talks about this elephant in the room. When your co-founder is your friend or your spouse or your family member, it's actually harder to have these conversations because you care a lot about the relationship versus like if you had a co-founder relationship with someone that wasn't, you know, deeply personally connected to you, you're less afraid about damaging the relationship and hurting the person's feelings. So it is harder to have those conversations with someone who's a good friend because you care about preserving the relationship as well as the co-founding agreement. Anyway, but you still need to sort of just say, like, you know, we need to have a talk. Like, I feel like I'm doing a lot of work and I'm a little frustrated and I don't want to put it on you. So like, can we just have a talk about like, maybe my expectations of you are wrong and we could do a little reset and maybe we could brainstorm, you know, a way that we can still accomplish this, that, you know, where we all are happy with how much we're contributing. And if you just sort of approach it like I'm frustrated and I just really need to talk to you, like, I think that's usually well received.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. That's what I'm going to try that. Thank you.
All right. Curling, you can add if you
No, that was really, I think that was really great advice. Definitely that Founder's Dilemma book has all these if then else ones that help with the Zipcar thing, right? So it's really good. You might even only have to read just a couple chapters, Andre, on that one. It'll help.
Okay.
Like at Fōkcus, like I have a spreadsheet where I dynamically track.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, like I have this record of like, and it's not like I don't track everybody's hours, right? But I approximately track, like, you know, when someone starts contributing, when they take a break, you know, when they come back, and sort of, and I have a formula for figuring out, you know, what the weighting of each of the contributions is, shifts depending on, what inputs I give it. And so we can at any given point see like what the equity split, looks like based on, how much, like I took a 6-month break. So like I got nothing for those 6 months, right? Like, and now I, and then I start contributing again, and my percentage bumps up a little bit as I contribute more. And I just think that's a very objective, like we sit down and we talk about it. We say like, does this look fair to everybody? And then everybody's comfortable with it.
Now, we did really good on the time, Johanna. I actually like Andre's question. I think that was really helpful, but we probably won't get to doing the speed networking. For one, we'll probably do that on the next session of Tech School, but I actually feel like the questions were way more important and all that. So thank you so much for all the input. Now, I know you put a lot of time in this one, and with the new branding. Only thing I was going to add to, we're going to have some of these things on the blog. We're going to, quote unquote, introduce the blog. Tomorrow we'll have there'll be like a little link saying blog on the top of our thing, and it'll have some of this feedback, especially things like the pitch deck and things that you've seen today. So thank you so much again, Johanna. I'll let Stephen just wrap it up.
Awesome. Thanks, Curling. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. I know we had a few people drop off already as we kind of finished up there. But if you're watching this live on YouTube or you're watching this recording, just to echo from the beginning of the talk, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment. We love to hear your thoughts. We want to learn from you as much as you might want to learn from us. So, but each one of those interactions that we get, whether it be a like on our video or whether it be a comment, somebody sharing their thoughts, sharing some nuggets of wisdom, or just asking a question, pushes those videos out to more people. So they could reach an entrepreneur or startup founder who really needed to hear some of the tips and some of the messages that were shared today, right? So if you have a chance to do that, feel free to do so. But as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I just told Andre a number. You guys can reach